Hi, everybody. So today we are going to talk about recognizing shift in rhetoric. And I'm hoping that it helps set you up for thinking a new way of thinking about how to tackle some of these essays that we're going to be reading in class. So we're going to talk about shift and what that means. All right. So, first question: what is shift? So, shift is when an author moves from one idea or tactic or tone to another in their writing, and they're trying to do this to further their argument. So, there are many ways that authors use this within their writing, this whole idea of shifting. Um, and we're going to talk a little bit about those different ways of shifting so that you can kind of understand a little bit more about it. So, shifts are kind of like transitioning, and they use them because they have to. So basically, when as a writer, we think that our audience is kind of fluid. So if our audience changes, or if our audience's minds start to change, we have to change as our audience does. So to argue a point, we have to have motivation or manipulation tactics. So for example, back when I was directing theater, I would approach new freshmen that I had in my honors freshman English class to talk about whether they would consider joining theater or not. I'd usually pick out the kids that I thought would be, most interested in doing it, and then I would approach it. So, what would I use? So, first, I might start off with a persuasion technique. I would use something called flattery. I would say, hey, you've been reading really well in class, and I noticed that you're really outgoing and very descriptive, and like everyone seems to like to listen to you, and you've got a really nice voice. So I've been wondering if you've ever done anything with theater. So I begin by telling them the good things about themselves, right? Then I might move into another tactic where I want to give them basic information. It's called expository. So I'm going to be giving them information. I'll say, hey, we have a theater program here at school, and we do like 3 different shows a year. And some involve music, some involve just straight plays, which is just like not musical theater. And then you can also do things behind the scenes as well if you're not really interested in being on the stage, like building the sets and painting and things like that. So giving basic information. Then maybe I would go into a narration mode, which is where I tell a story or I give my experience. So I might tell an anecdote of my own experience in theater. And then maybe I might go into like description, like how it feels to be part of a group behind the scenes, and I'm describing those sort of feelings. So I think about how I'm going to go about doing this. And I think about what kind of audience I have. So if I know I'm going up to someone who is more hostile to what I want to convince them of, I know I have to take a different tack. So I may start with flattery. I may give them information about like how you can do this and football at the same time, or whatever it might happen to be. Versus if I go up to a supportive audience, a kid who I think is more willing to join theater, I'm going to use different tactics. So because the speaker audience relationship changes when the audience changes, so do my tactics. Okay, so signs of shifting. When you're reading an article, good authors and speakers make subtle, natural shifts. So sometimes they're really hard to find a shift because you don't want to know when you're being manipulated. I mean, because I am a good reader of rhetoric, I can usually tell when I'm being manipulated. If someone is flattering me, I know that it's going to lead into them asking me to do something I don't want to do, right? It happens all the time here at school. So shifts are sometimes hard to find, and sometimes people disagree where those shifts occur. But and that's probably because our unique backgrounds and who we are as people kind of play into each other's tones and what we find in writing. So the better we know our audience, the more obvious we can make our shifts. So there are shift flags, which are transitions. They don't always indicate that a shift is going to happen, but sometimes they do. There are different types of shifts. So there are contrasts, like however, yet, nonetheless, but. And then there are transitions called intensifying transitions, which indicate indeed to illustrate, of course, without a doubt. So those intensifying transitions indicate that a shift is probably not about to appear, whereas a contrast transition will most likely introduce a shift, a change in shift. If you are interested, right here, the Badger list of transitions is a really good link if you go onto the original slideshow, and you can see transitions that are usually used and for what purpose. They're good to insert in your own writing, but they're also good to start looking for in other people's writing. Okay, so what different types of shifts are there? So I've already talked to you a little bit about the different modes. These are used in a short piece of nonfiction. They're not used that frequently to switch in mode. If you start in narrative mode, you usually stay in narrative mode in a short piece. If you start in expository, you usually stay there. But you could shift in and out of them a little bit. Like you could use description, and that description may not be a switch in mode because a mode is your style of writing, but it could aid in your manipulation of the audience, basically. So let me talk to you about this. Expository mode is where you provide information to your audience. So just straight out facts. Like when I'm telling a student who might be interested in joining theater, what we're doing in theater, or what different things they can be in. Then there's description. So descriptive mode pulls us into the place that the person wants us to be in, a situation. It's typically an appeal to pathos, an emotional appeal. And that kind of brings us there in the present. Like I said, I might describe what it feels like to be backstage or to be part of a group that's, creating art. Persuasive mode is using tactics to get a person to agree with you. So those Aristotelian appeals to ethos, pathos, and logos, those are part of persuasive techniques. And one of the things we're going to talk about this year is that I believe all writing is persuasive. Even when we try not to be persuasive, we're being persuasive. Something that is when we present the quote unquote straight facts of something, the facts that we suggest is actually making an argument. Okay, so I want you to consider most writing is persuasive. However, when we're really trying to encourage someone to come over to our side, then we're into persuasive mode. And then there's narrative, using stories to convince someone of something. All right, that's mode shifts. What we see most frequently in short pieces of literature, however, are time intense shifts. So when an author goes from one period of history to another, or if the author is discussing about something that happens in the past and then suddenly we move forward into the future, like what does this mean for the future? That's a shift in time or tense. Tense can also be a shift from writing about something in the past tense and then writing about it in the present tense. All right, this is frequently used in fiction, and we can think of that too as like flashbacks and foreshadowing and things like that. It's when our verbs change. Then there's the topic and focus shift that sometimes goes into further detail or elaborates on a previous point. It could be a focus from a general idea to a specific. So if I'm talking generally about the problems with technology and the way our brain functions, and then I go into specific details about the cell phone as opposed to just YouTube, for example, I have a shift from general to specific. That's a focus shift. Topic shift could be like not completely changing the topic, but appearing to a change to a different topic than the one you had previously been writing about. And then there's finally the tone shift. So we see this a lot in Abigail Adams' letter to her son, where she changes her shift from being like motherly and understanding to suddenly being a little bit stricter. Or she changes her tone from being really more informative tone to a very persuasive tone. And that's kind of like that mode idea as well. Okay. Those are the different types of shifts. So speaking of Abigail Adams' letter to her son, if you take a look at Abigail Adams' letter to her son again, I have divided it differently this time into 6 different sections instead of 3, which we started with. So if you look at section 1 and you try to determine what the shift is, we could say that the shift from section 1 to section 2 is a shift in tone. So first she is speaking directly to her son in a tone that is very motherly, right? Then she moves into something that's a little bit more removed from her son, some background information, right? So that could be considered like a personal tone to a more impersonal tone when she talks about some author that I have met with, right? It could be also considered a shift in topic. She goes from writing about the voyage to France and what happened before they left to this random, some author who compares a judicious traveler to a river, right? That's a shift in topic. And that's also considered shift in focus, right? You could also say it's a shift in mode from the first 2 paragraphs, which are more persuasive, trying to convince him that he'd made the right move and going on the journey, to a little bit more expository, giving background information about this metaphor of a traveler and a river. Then she goes back to a little bit more persuasive and personal. Okay? Now we're moving from section 2 to section 3. So section 2, she's writing about the traveler and the river and what he's missing in his life. And then section 3, she moves into these historical examples. So here we go, we change our shift in focus from a general metaphorical information to something that's a little bit more specific. So we move from here's the metaphor, now we're specific. We could also say this is from persuasive mode into descriptive or expository mode, probably expository mode, because she's kind of like teaching him facts about the heroes of the time period. She's still being persuasive, but she's kind of like teaching him a lesson. And that's a clear shift in tone. Okay, then we move from section 3 to section 4, right? So section 3 to section 4, she does a shift from this expository kind of teaching a lesson into something that's much more personal. And we can see that because we have this little yet here. We know that that's a flag. Yet is a change. And then here we go from this kind of like third person back to first person. My son. It is your lot, my son, to be an eyewitness to these calamities. So she directly addresses her son. And that flag, that yet and that my son, tells us that she is going from more academic reasoning to something that's a little bit more appeals to pathos. And sure enough, she brings in this idea of God as his generous and powerful ally. Okay? Now, from section 4 to section 5, she's just been really personal and persuasive, but this nor ought it to be the least of your incitements, you could say that indicates a shift in tone. So here she's much more inspirational. God is behind you and he'll look out for you. And then she goes into this idea about your family. You have a parent who has taken a large and active share in this contest. So she kind of gets a little bit more stern with him. It's a motherly tone warning. So we've got a shift in tone there where she says, basically, don't embarrass your dad. All right. And then there's section 5 to section 6, where she finally kind of puts a conclusion, a focus shift from an emphasis on the relationship with his dad and his mom to a more personal appeal. So we go from a little more encouraging at the end here than what she has been before, which she basically calls him stupid and not knowing his own mind. So tone shift at the end there. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to think about trying it yourself. So this next slide is from a retired AP exam. You've already seen it. And I want you to think about where shifts might occur and why did you choose that to show a shift? Did you see a flag? Did you see a change in something? And then consider what's the shift from. Is it a shift from one mode to another, one tone to another, one time or tense to another, or one focus or topic to another. You will have to do that by pausing this video and taking a look at this passage. It is a selection from The Indispensable Opposition by Walter Lippmann. So take a few minutes, pause the video, and take a look at this passage to determine where you believe the shifts are. And we'll talk about this more in class with our current readings, like Is Google Making Us Stupid? And Pregame, Who Invented White People? And all of the things that we're using to kind of build up to writing our first major paper. But this is a good small little retired passage that you can use as a start, at least one that you're already familiar with. All right, I hope that gives you at least an introduction to shifts in rhetoric. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon in class.